Hello, everyone. Welcome to the KieLive 24.
Yes, and today we have a special guest to talk about DMN.
As usual, all our guests are special, right, Alex?
That's a secret.
Yeah, but this guy that is here with us today, he's not only super technical and a really, really good developer, but he's also part of the team who is working on the evolution and creation of the DMN specification. So he sees both sides of the world, worlds.
Yeah, and that's very important how Red Hat believes on these specification standards and bring these to the community. And that's our guest here will talk about our involvement and the importance of that for the industry.
Exactly. And the guy who's here with us today is Matteo Mortari. Hey, Matteo, ciao.
Ciao, everyone. Ciao, Karina. Ciao, Alex. Hello, everybody that is connected. And thank you for inviting me today.
And for those who are in Brazil, he's not saying goodbye, okay? That's just Italian.
Yeah, sorry, I always forget about it.
That's okay. So as usual, for those who are joining for the first time, please know that this was supposed to be an in-person event where we could talk to each other, see each other, and interact. So feel free to share anything you want on the chat, send us a hi, tell us where you're watching us from. So yeah, just feel free to feel at home here today and to share your questions with Matteo.
Yeah, and that's your point, Karina. That's a very unique situation. We have here Matteo, that's part of the spec, working on the engine and has all this knowledge. You have the opportunity now to ask questions live. That can be hard. He is not. Well, and we invite you to.
Send a hard question. Don't be afraid to send a hard question. Don't be afraid, indeed, to interact with us. Karina and Alex, as always, are going to be very good hosts in sort of like moderating the question for me, while I will show you some demos throughout today.
And are you comfortable with us interrupting you to bring the questions during the presentation?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The only warning I have is that I prepared a lot of content. So you have asked for a deep dive. So I prepared really a lot. And let's say, up to you when you want to interrupt, or let's say if you want to have a sort of like an after party after the presentation. I'm up for everything.
Okay, so should we start?
Yeah, allow me to share the screen.
I'm eager to hear about this content.
Okay, I'm preparing sharing the screen. Put you here. And all right. So thank you everyone for joining us today, and thank you Karina and Alex for the introduction. Just before we start, I will relaunch the invitation that Luca has made in a previous KieLive. Please don't hesitate to interact with us during the presentation of today, but also to join us on the many channels that we have available. So there will be links in the live chat, or you will see if it is recorded in the description down below. But please don't hesitate to join our mailing list and all our communication channel. What we're going to see today, we prepared 4 topics of discussion, and we hope that these 4 topics will bring interesting insights both to developers and coders, but as well to business analysts, modelers, and developers. The first item that I would like to discuss with you today is an overview, a survey of the context, the landscape where DMN finds application. And this is important because with this survey, we can really understand why DMN matters, and understanding why it matters, it will help us to evaluate how to be most impactful in deploying it, into using it where it is where it has some advantages or disadvantages. The second topic of today is going to be about DMN validation features. In the previous KieLive, Eduardo has made an interesting overview about the difference between compile time and runtime, and how we can anticipate at compile time some checks, some controls that you don't have to experience while you're running at runtime in production. With DMN, we can do a step even further, more to anticipate this check by doing some static analysis, so even before compile time. But we will discuss this in detail. Then we will have some discussion about some DMN patterns that I've seen more recently, and I thought that they are valuable. And finally, we will have a discussion of OpenAPI that would likely bring us to the conclusion. So let's start immediately. And the first topic is the survey of the context so that we can understand why DMN matters. A little warning here. This section is the one in the presentation that I don't have live demos, but I'm going to be very, very vertical. So stay with me. We start from the highest level possible. And here I've collected throughout the years many industry analyst reports. I'm not going to read them for you verbatim, no worries. But I put the emphasis so that we can see what are the key points. This report from 2018 from 451 Research has shown how really businesses are deploying digital transformation initiative to mainly leverage two aspects. One is the cloud native capabilities, but also more importantly, I would say as well, is the ability to quickly reassemble the processes, quickly change them, to reassemble how the logic on how they interact and how it works. And if we take another report from another industry analyst, in this case, this is Gartner from 2021, so it's more recent, you can see that between the trends, these trends are still here. So distributed cloud, this is not really a big surprise that cloud is a technology trend nowadays. But as you can see, they call it intelligent composable businesses or hyper automation, is the capability to rearrange the process, the logic that is underlying of the application, but it is supporting the business. And this allows the business to be reactive to the changes in the organization, but also outside. And what better witnesses of the time that we're living in, where this is really needed. So with this in mind, we will move now one step down. So what is the business practice that has the most impact in this flowing of automating business processes? Well, it's business analysis, and therefore as well, any business automation. What is business analysis? Here I would like to stress out a point that business analysis is like a spectrum that has two sort of like edges. It lives in between what would be the strategic analysis, that is the C-level, the C-suite, which is concerned to how to rearrange business processes and how to enact digital transformation program in order to maybe improve some of the processes that the business is doing today, or as well to unlock new business opportunity, new opportunities that might lie in the market that the business would like to offer a service or offer a product for. And this is on one end. On the other hand, you would have IT analysis. This is maybe also more known to the audience as well. This is about translating what is typically discussed as a business requirement or functional requirement and to translate it into actual hardware or software needed to support this. So the business analysis is everything that is in this spectrum that facilitate the elicitation of business requirement and everything that is needed from a process analysis, from a modeling analysis, in order to translate what is really the strategy of the business into an actual executable things in software and in hardware where needed. What will be the challenges that are facing? Those are always evolving. So there is always changing in policies inside the business or coming from external events such as a new regulation. Think about in Europe, the GDPR legislation and how it's impacted many businesses. There is also another key challenge, which is the increasing amount of events from various sources that you would like to integrate and to take advantage of from a business point of view. So a few years ago, really big data was such a buzzword. And think about at that time how much we talked about the variety of data. Has this disappeared? No, it is always an increasing concern or an opportunity that we might like to leverage. And so all of this is about defining really what is your processes and how you want to automate it and how do you want to really consolidate all the strategy into an executable thing. And here is where business automation can help. And we will see how we do it as well whenever possible with open standards. So with business automation, we are interested in offering you process definition. This is known from BPMN, for instance, or decision paradigms, such as what I have represented here, a decision table, which is not only but a visual way to represent how you make a decision based on certain constraint. It can be a decision, it can also be known as a rule. So maybe something that is more known in the CEP scenarios, that is really a DSL to describe that under a certain constraint, you would have some consequence executed out of that. And then, of course, part of this is as well everything about mathematical optimizations. Think about every Optaplanner use cases that you may have seen in this on this channel with Geoffrey, like vehicle routing. So that is also taking that into account, like in a constraint optimization problem, how we can take the best decision that really have the most impactful outcome in improving a process or a service that we would like to provide. So, and here is really something that is dear to me, as also Karina was anticipating into the introduction. Wherever possible, we support standards and especially open standard. BPMN might be the most easier for you to realize, because we support BPMN2 in the JBPM as well in Kogito. DMN is the same thing. We also support, we have a support for PMML for some of the machine learning predictive models that the standard describes, and as well for serverless workflow. So anything that is about orchestrating this workflow in a cloud native environment, which is really all the most the rage all these years and nowadays. So we've moved from the high level point of view as seen from the industry analyst to the actual business practices and how we can use business automation with open standards to really address and really tackle this problem. And now we will move into a very specific area, the discipline of decision management, and how the DMN standard can help us here. What is decision management? Is really this discipline that is about everything about methodologies, best practices, standards that really formalize how business take decisions. The decision that most commonly are called the tactical decision. So you've seen something happening during your provision of a service, and you want to decide how to best respond to a customer inquiry, to a prospect coming to ask you for a service. This discipline, being a discipline, you have the availability of many books, training resources, material, consultant, professional that can help you to leverage here. So this is important to keep it in mind in the context, because you can use it to scale it. So you can use the literature of decision management, but also the availability of this knowledge throughout across many businesses and professionals to really scale out and implement your solution. It is also very interesting for some aspect in order to answer a question which is called about BAM or KPI management, because normally every time that you talk about a strategic initiative, you would like to capture some business relevant KPIs that will sort of like answer the question like, okay, now that we're implementing this, are we really doing what is required from a strategic point of view? And so in this concept, then we have the DMN, which is the standard for OMG. So this is not going to be a tutorial about DMN today. I'm just going to survey a little bit, a few key point information. It's a standard, again, made by OMG. We as Red Hat, we also participate at the OMG RTF for the definition of the standards. We do it across a pool of vendors, practitioners, and subject domain expert about these methodologies, and is a complementary standard to BPMN and the CMMN. The one thing that I like especially about DMN is that not only provides you with a visual and a standard notation, but also the semantic of execution is formalized in the spec itself. It means that once you define a DMN model, if you go into the detail about the decision logic, there is no doubt about what that DMN model will evaluate to once you supply it with their inputs. So I think this is a very interesting thing, because DMN has really the potential to disrupt and really drive radical change in the market, especially when combined with BPMN, because now you can not only define a process, but you can define in a very semantic, precise way how you will take a decision that normally is in a task before a gateway in a BPMN process. So this is one of the, I would say, the most impactful way that DMN can be used for. But as well, it is also very interesting from an analytical point of view when you want to integrate it into a broader AI solution that integrates machine learning models. You may have seen this in the presentation with Daniele, but the key point to keep in mind is that you can integrate machine learning predictive models with AI in order to really answer questions about explainability. It doesn't provide the solution to all problems, but this is very interesting to answer certain explainability criteria as, for instance, required by new legislation such as GDPR. One maybe less known aspect is that we've seen some applicability for blockchain smart contract. I would like to be clear, we are not speaking about cryptocurrency here. I'm speaking only about the blockchain because there is a use case requirement to implement a contract on top of the blockchain. But today's all the languages available in that space are very low level. Think about assembly level. So it's difficult for the people implementing the contract to really discuss with their stakeholder that define the contract if that code is really doing what the contract is supposed to do. And we've seen some application of that with DMN. There is one presentation as well, if you search it on YouTube, from our very own Edson Tirelli. So I thought it was an interesting way of DMN being applied that could be of interest to the audience. Now, specifically talking about the DMN, you have learned that DMN has a DRG, a decision requirement graph, and I'm not going again to repeat here, but a few key points. Please keep in mind that there is no doubt from the specification point of view that once you define this DRG model, so a graph like this, what is the semantic from a DMN point of view? The semantic from the DMN point of view is that you have some input data that are defined in the input node, and then you would take some decision based on the edges that define information requirement dependencies between each of every decision. And behind this decision, you may have a decision logic defined, such as a decision table, or it might be a human that needs to act on the decision. What I want to stress out here is that there is no sort of like a copyright on how you can use square boxes and round boxes in a way. So it's like I've seen in the wild some use cases of DRG being used to actually convey anything, something else. And there is no problem with that. But if we're speaking about DMN, if I say this graph is defining the DMN model, then it's very clear what this represents for. And similarly, it's very clear that the DMN can really be a complementary use case when you have defined a process whereby in a business rule task just before a gateway of a BPMN, before DMN, you didn't have a cross-vendor way to describe how you decide this routing. But now you have. So you can use open standards, BPMN and DMN in this case, to define really your processes, but also how you come up with your business relevant decision, okay? So in a previous, I think in a previous KieLive, there was some questions about DMN, other Drools asset, and how they compare to each other. So I thought about just making a roundup about on this point here. Think that DMN is one of the many assets that we support in Drools. So it's a new capability behind the same API or the same platform. Is it true that DMN and DRL really do overlap in some of the features, but they have different strengths? And the strength of DMN models lies in being an open standard, in the business appeal that you can be discussing what you have modeled with DMN, with your stakeholder, with your business analyst, with your subject domain expert, and for the ease of documentation. Also, we should remember that in DMN, we speak about decision, not really rules that have sort of like if this, then that. So it's really everything about stateless. in my, I would say, my attempt to maybe highlight a few key points that are the ones that are that I've seen discussed on forum, mailing list, and on Stack Overflow. I'm not very active on Stack Overflow, but this is the only answer that I've given in sometimes that from time to time I receive an upvote. So I'm really curious about who does upvote it. I found it funny. But if we compare DMN and DRL, and we highlight some of the features, yes, both define a paradigm where you can describe a decision table. So both of them cover these use cases, and both of them cover the use case of being stateless. So you can execute DMN and DRL in a stateless way. Now, when it comes to statefulness, and especially long-running session with immutability, then DRL is definitely, I would say, the go-to standard here. But it doesn't mean that you cannot do that with DMN. Think about, for instance, if in a rule, as a consequence, you invoke some DMN as a function. You can do that. And also, think about, even not considering only DRL, think about when you do event sourcing or event streaming, these kind of patterns that are especially helpful in a very big data sort of like environment. So there you have some parts which are about a functional approach, and then you push the boundary of mutability to the external of the system, to the interface. So you can use DMN as a functional evaluation, and then you push the boundary of mutability or the event updates at the boundary. And likewise, you could normally achieve that. You do achieve that with the programming. You can do the same things with the DMN and have an hybrid approach. Same thing about CEP or complex event processing. The question there that often arises is that I want to reason on events that are coming in. Now, DRL offers CEP capabilities, but also DMN has some temporal operators that can be very helpful. So nothing forbids you from sort of like, you will need to manage the state in some way, and with DMN alone, you cannot do that. But if you integrate DMN, let's say, instead of DRL, or you integrate with DMN with something else, you can still achieve this use case requirement. And finally, don't forget that the power of DMN is in its standard notation. So that, of course, it's a really powerful way, because it means that you can really share the DMN with, I would say, an audience that is very accustomed to all this standard notation by OMG consortia. Sorry.
Finally, I have one question, Matteo, before you move to the next topic.
Yeah, just let me, sorry, Alex, just one very precise point here, just these little things here. I don't want to drive the message on sort of like on the other side of the spectrum. DRL is open source and is not a vendor lock-in. So you can use like the executable model that Luca and Mario have presented. You are free to use it. It's not DRL is done in an open source community that is us, that is driven by Red Hat, but it doesn't mean that you cannot use it in an open way as well. Alex, sorry, I just wanted to.
No, absolutely. I just have one curiosity. It's just curiosity, and likely lots of our people in our audience has similar curiosity. So you're pointing here that different aspects were usually one better than other, but behind the scenes, when we open the hood, are we talking about the same engine or how they differ? There's a different code base or shared components. It's just curiosity. I know that's not exposed to our users, these things, but I think it's interesting to know.
This is a very interesting point and it's very relevant. So thank you for the question. I don't go into the full details here, but first of all, DMN is very well integrated within the Drools platform. So it reuses not only part of the engine, but also part of what I would say is the common API. Think about every time that DMN is integrated with a KJAR, or think about every time that DMN is integrated with a Kogito application. So our engine lives within the ecosystem. Also as well, we have some features that are using really some internals of the rate and freak algorithm, but we are not yet fully satisfied with the result. So we are really, and especially a shout out here to Mario and Luca, who have been sort of like interacting with me at really taking on these things. to really try to achieve the most satisfactory result in integrating really the internals of the engine is still an ongoing work, and stay tuned for more on this topic.
No, that's awesome, because as I tried to connect like all the details that Mario presented us, and if it would benefit using DMN some optimization, and it seems that we are in this path. Of course, it's a long journey to optimizations in every place, and especially DMN is newer than DRL and all the code base that we have there. But it's awesome that we are finding and going to this path. Thank you for the clarification.
That is absolutely the direction that we are going, and don't be afraid to, let's say, maybe this is more for the mailing list discussion. If you have especially some use cases where you see that the performance might not be the best all, we try to find some sensible defaults, but we can guide you to try to find every time that you may have some performance issue. Don't hesitate to be in touch, because it's actually with the response of the community, of the users, that we find out every time that we can really drive improvement.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And
my pleasure. Okay, so let's move to the next topic for today, that is about the DMN validation features. As I was saying here, it's think about these as a set of capabilities that you can integrate inside of the work that you're doing with DMN. Normally, you see validation as part of the editor in Decision Central or Business Central, but it's not sort of like tied specifically to the editor per se. It's a set of capabilities that, for instance, we reuse now every time that you are in a Kogito build system. We integrated these checks for you, and you may choose to also disable it if for any reason you don't need them. But I think that after this presentation, you will find where they are meaningful. So what we do is that we have some static analysis, some compilation checks, and some further analysis on decision tables based on the compilation. Here I take the sort of like the invite that Eduardo has mentioned in the previous KieLive. Is like we should try to anticipate at compile time, or I would say even further, every time that we can avoid a headache for you at runtime. So you don't want to sort of like have your application deployed into production and running, reacting to real data, just to discover that you've done something that is not really semantically valid from a DMN point of view. We offer you the validation of the of the XML against the XSD. So this is to make sure that the syntax of the XML is compliant with the DMN specification. It's of course a trivial check, but we do it for you in the case that you receive a DMN from, let's say, any editor out there, and you want to check, is this really a DMN valid file? So we do that, but just immediately after, still statically, we do some pre-compilation semantic checks, like we check that you don't have duplicate names, which are not enforced at the XSD level, but are required by the spec. We also check, for instance, that decision services have at least some computation being performed as part of the output decision. This is important because the spec allows the interchange of incomplete model. But if you're coming to the build now, or you are up to come into the build in order to execute it, then there are some semantics that we check for you. And fun fact here, this is also to reiterate on what Alex was mentioning, the static validation rules, actually we defined them with DRL. And this is it was a really interesting dog fooding experience, especially for me, I would say, in defining with DRL the rules that I want to enforce for a valid semantic DMN files. So you can also contribute if you think that there are some semantic rules that we didn't put inside there. You can define them with the DRL that all you know and love. And here, being not only done with Drools, but they are executed with the executable model. And here, I would say it's really a witness and a statement of the great work that Mario, Toshia, and Luca, especially Luca, have done in helping me here, making sure that all these rules execute as we intended on the executable model before the executable model was sort of like released as a feature to the users. And it really proved an interesting work. Then we also, of course, do some compilation phase checks. And we do some decision tables analysis statically. So you don't have to execute to find if there are some problems in the tables. These checks are taken from literature, and I especially think about the book from Bruce Silver about table analysis. That I would say there are a lot of things that are valid on decision table per se, so not specifically about DMN. And these are about, we want to check that in a decision table, you possibly don't have gaps. So let's say if you feed the table with some data, it's not that you don't find a rule that would match for that values. If you have overlaps, so that if some rules have competing constraints, those are consistent with the hit policy. This is something very specific about DMN. We check that rules can be combined. You should be combining them. Rule masking and misleading rules is something very peculiar of DMN, and normalization checks like first normal form, second normal form. All of this is, so the one that you see on the left of the slide is coming from literature. What is you have on the right-hand side is the expectation. So any, we check that, for instance, types that you define in the header that are imported from another DMN models work the same as they were defined in the same model. We check the null handling. We try to emit warning wherever possible, and the error level to be consistent. But I'll show you one example that maybe it comes more clear. Here you have a decision table that is run through this check of decision table analysis. And the system is telling us 3 messages, 2 warnings, and 1 error. The first thing is that the rule number 1 and rule number 3 should be combined them. And normally it's a good practice to have your table as compact as possible. The less to read, the less time you have to spend with your stakeholder to make sure that what you've implemented as a DMN model is really what they meant. Then as well, there is really a problem, I would say an error, that rule number 2 and rule number 4, they overlap for the values of 660 and the value bad. And this is a problem because the hit policy is unique. So if you had really those 2 values fed into the decision table, both rows would have highlighted, and therefore it's a problem for the hit policy of unique. That of DMN, it asks for only 1 matches to always be available. You don't have to have this headache at runtime. We do this check for you while during compilation phase. So here is maybe as well something that we can try to see if the audience is still there. Is called the misleading rule. Is an example taken from Van Tienen, that is a professor. And what do you think is the result in this table for the value check? So when I would obtain check while executing this decision table, I give you 5 seconds.
And consider that we have a small delay of 5 seconds. So how that goes?
Okay, but okay, maybe also some in the audience are really sort of like have read the books, so already know the answer to this trivia. But especially myself, the first time I've read this article, I didn't realize that I would have said, oh, check. When the risk is medium, then I have check. Not really. Because you are misled by the hit policy and the priority of the output. Exactly. The real answer here is that only when the risk is mitigated, is valorized as true, and you have risk medium, you would obtain the result check. In the other cases, like for instance, if the is mitigated will be valorized as false, then the result would be null, regardless of the risk actually. And these are things that, okay, Matteo, this is a trivial example. Come on, this is more for you nerds. Well, think about when you have a bigger decision table, the system can do the check for you. And so you don't have this problem. So all these checks are done for you. I have also a very quick demo about the hit policy recommender that I will leave for you the slide with the in a nutshell approach about what it is about. But I think it's just more easier if I'll just show you to you live. And here we start with the first table that is about the sound level in decibel and how they evaluated to some risk. So let's say between less than 80 decibel, there is no risk, but then above 80 decibel, it start to be harmful for you, or even up a certain threshold, it will become a danger, so irreversible damage, or even in very extreme circumstances, it can even be deadly. So what is this decision table? If I save it now, we can see that actually we got a message reported here. And that the evaluation hit policy, the recommendation is, well, Matteo, you can change this table to unique, simply because I've put any, but it's really not the most obvious why you should have chose any when actually all the values are unrelated. So this is all done automatically. I will show you now some other exercises in increasing level of complexity. So here I have another table where instead, for any reason, I want to say, okay, for value 80, this is the output, and for greater than 120, this is the other output as well. And then now if I save it, I obtain an error. I obtain an error because there are a couple of problems here, the overlaps, but especially this is not consistent with the hit policy. The hit policy recommender cannot know for you what you wanted to do here. Did you want to make the two rules in a subsumption, and so you want to compact the table, or for any reason you wanted to change the hit policy for a hit policy that would allow this semantically in DMN? And the hit policy that would have allowed this in DMN is any. When the hit policy recommender can detect the situation, it will present it to you. So this is what will happen in that case. And finally, for this this final exercise today, in this table, what you would have is that the priority are defined, and if I save it now, I obtain. Sorry, I can click on the button really. So I obtain that the hit policy should be priority because the engine has detected that there is a priority in the output, and actually you may want really to change it from first to priority here, because it could be misleading, where the danger, of course, is more important than harmful messages. And so if you left it with first, you would have maybe obtained, for let's say a value of 150, which is really crazy, you would have the rule would have stopped here for harmful, but what the message that you really wanted out would be danger. This is something that we implemented with a collaboration with Bruce Silver, the same Bruce Silver that writes the book. And I think this is a very interesting way to really implement the methodology on top of the engine. So this is the demo for the decision table validation. Allow me just.
I know you're talking about hit policies and all, but there is a question around decision tables. So do you have any best practices on the size of decision tables, considering like real cases are actually they usually have very large tables. So any best practices on about the size of it?
What I would suggest as well is in this, well, there are many considerations that you can say here. So it depends on the use case at hand. And also it depends on what you really want to achieve. Do you want to achieve better performance? Do you want to achieve better clarity? Do you really want it? Is it really a decision table? Because also in some online forum discussion I've seen, well, this is a decision table when actually it was more the role of a database. So we have to be careful every time that we speak about decision table. We need to see the details. I can tell you my experience. For instance, this is coming out of a demo that we'll have for later today. I was implementing out of a scientific paper this decision table as written on paper. And well, I've done it. It was okay. I entered the data and whatever, whatnot. And then finally, the decision table analysis tells me, well, you have a few rules that can be contracted and compacted. And maybe this is like something that when you see the table, immediately you don't realize. But then when you really implement this kind of system, then you find to achieve. And so if you can compact the table, then you can say, so there are a few instances where I thought it would have resulted in different values, but actually it's like, because they can be compacted, then actually are the same, or one of the input is irrelevant. So there are many considerations that we can say, and all my suggestion is always to share it with your peers in the mailing list if you can, or anonymize it if needed. And see, there are many discussions that can be done. Normally, what the KDMN validation tells me, in some occasions I decide not to implement the suggestion that these checks are telling me, but in most of the time I found them of value. I don't know if that helped, but it's a very, very broad question.
Another one. So, and this one is actually about, I think it's a little bit about roadmap, because when you are used to working with the old DRL way of doing it, we have the guided decision tables and these other decision tables. Is there any plan on importing these decision tables to DMN, like straight through, or can you import it somehow to a node? How's that? How should users deal with that? It is good that we have Alex in here, right?
I want to know now. Yeah, now I want to know.
You have to tell me. Let's say yes. So okay, the serious answer is that it depends. If you're looking to an automated way to translate them, we can discuss. If instead you are saying no, I would like to have one-shot import as an editor, this will be more of a question of say Alex team and Guilherme that can answer that. They are available on the mailing list. I would invite you to have a conversation with them, share the use cases, because I can tell you from my perspective, everything that I've done in the engine that was not sort of like, I don't have like brilliant ideas. I only have that people come to me with the use cases, and then I try to find a feature that can help us.
An example that is pretty nice and that I think that is actually helping real users of DMN is a component that you created to import from XLS tables. So customers usually create those big, huge XLS tables. So you created this small component that can import it to DMN. So that is a useful and brilliant thing that you did.
Is an experiment.
Thunder, Karina. I was about
to talk. It's an experiment. No, I have to say, it's an experiment that we are doing. So I invite everyone who has a need for it to share it, because we are tackling it from two perspectives. One is the perspective where you have an Excel file that you want to translate in general, but also the other aspect is there are people that say, no, it's like I just needed to copy an Excel into the editor, and this is something like about the copy paste in the editor capabilities. So again, the recommendation is share your use case in the mailing list, and if it is something that, let's say, pertains more to the engine, I will answer, or otherwise we will get the people who are more in charge of the editors to follow up with you.
Perfect. I think we should move forward with the presentation.
Yeah, let's see. Well, we can also in the slide we have some sort of like key points that eventually I can skip.
Matteo, come on! This is such good material.
I rely on you and tell me when to stop it, when people are sort of like about to jump on us. Okay, so
let's do that.
Let's jump to some pragmatic DMN patterns that I've seen in action, and maybe here I will even increase the speed, so you will have the recording and slow down the speed if I'm going too fast. No, I'm kidding. So the demo that I would like to show to you today, I prepared some DMN models. And,
font size, Matteozito, font size.
Yeah, no worries. So if I don't zoom in like when I do like that, they don't need to read the small small fonts. No worries. But thank you for the reminder. So here you have a model, and in every sort of like is say a custom that every time that you discuss a DMN, you must discuss some loan prequalification. Like in programming languages, you have a hello world. For DMN, you must have a use case about a loan prequalification. So what we are doing here, we have a prospect that is, we are starting to define the policy with our stakeholder about how do we respond to a prospect coming asking for a loan. a prospect that is bringing to us the credit score information, the salary information, and the loan requested. We want to compute based on the debt to income ratio, what is the value for the pre-approval. So below a certain credit score, we must check the debt to income ratio. Above a certain credit score, we always pre-approve it. Pre-approve it, of course, there will be other process that might take into play here. So this is a model that you may start when you are engaging in a workshop with your stakeholder. You can start to define in order to really see what are the requirements between the different inputs and the decision that you want to make, and what are the key decision logic that you need to implement. Of course, this means that as well you can have a scenario simulation, and here I will open it for you, so that you can really define in here your no regression test scenario cases that basically you say, okay, what in a workshop I can say what are the values that I expect comes as an input and how the decision logic should behave. Of course, please keep in mind, this is a synthetic example. We don't have time to do a full-blown example. But the point will come a little bit clearer now. Once I started to do this, because the question is, most often I see, when should I refactor? How many times do I need to import? And this kind of question. My motto here is that premature optimization is the root of all evil, and the same thing goes for basically refactoring. I personally believe, and actually, sorry, maybe I should have said, in this section, which is about patterns, I will tell you my very personal and humble opinion. Take it as the one of the person who contributes to the engine, and therefore I've seen a few use cases, and so would like to share his thought with you. You may decide that you agree, or you don't disagree, or you disagree. You can just let us also know in the chat while I'm speaking about this. So always start with the DRG first, the most simple as possible. This would help you to drive the conversation with your business stakeholder and make sure that your definition of the DRG is sound, the decision logic is doing what it wants. Then only after, like in this case, what I did is that I said, okay, these are a first iteration on the model. And then I want to show the capabilities of defining what is my data dictionary or my business ontology. The DMN spec does not specify anything about the business dictionary, but it doesn't mean that from a pragmatical point of view, you can actually use the capability of imports to define data types and to reuse it. The case that I find most often is where I want to define the data structure. So credit score is usually a value that is always between certain numbers. The loan request that is coming might always be consistent with a couple of information that are always requested. And as you start to do that, maybe you decide that what you want to do is you want to define a common, say here, financial-based library that you can use to really do define your DTI computation, so that you don't have to remember. Because personally, I always forget how do you compute DTI, if it is on a yearly basis, on a monthly basis, and whatever. Once you have defined that, then you can refactor your DMN model, and you can take advantage of the import functionality in order to import your service, but also import your data types. That becomes like think about the JVM that you have as on the library. You define a base library that you import it. Here is shown with the included model, so that you can have the redefinition of the imported services. The credit score you will see here is coming from the imported one. So now that I've done this exercise after, what I can do is that it's very easy to do that with the Kogito tooling. So actually a really good shout out to Daniele, Gabriele, and Yezer, who are doing also the scenario simulation tool. And basically what I did is that I just copy and pasted the file of the scenario, and the only change that I did is, I always forget where I find it here. I've shown, I wired it to the other DMN model. And basically, when you execute it, it's the same test that maybe you've changed it to rewire to the new model, or you want to make sure that in the same cases you achieve the same result. So in this case, what you can do that you can come back to your stakeholder and say, hey, it's like, it's like, do you think like some services can be reused in other models? This is now an opportunity for us to standardize on this, so on decision services and data types. This is maybe a preamble to show you what is what I call the reusability scale. And again, this is a personal opinion, but try to strive to reuse decision services and item definition as your first choice, always. BKMs, you can reuse them, and they work really good as well. I put them, though, in a sort of like a lower step of the scale, simply because I found that to define them in the base model, it's a bit harder for you to define the test, but they work the same. Finally, and try to steer away from trying to reuse input data and decision. I want to be very clear. The spec allows for importing input data and decision, and if you really know what you're doing, you can do so. But we found out with many use cases, real use cases, that it's difficult for the modeler to actually reuse them in the correct way. So if you ask me, I will always suggest you define a decision services, reuse your item definition, or if sort of like you're experienced, reuse as well BKMs. You may use a reuse input data on decision, but be aware that it will come with an increased level of difficulties. Let's see also some other patterns that are more for functional approaches. One is about every time here we will deal with non-determinism or mutabilities. The first case that maybe I want to show to you is I've seen now coming in many other use cases, so close the others. I've seen a case where the today's date or today's date and time is relevant to take a decision. What is the business relevant decision here? A customer comes, calls to the help desk, call the ticket system, and we want to determine based on the level of the customer, what is the SLA that we want to achieve. So for a premium subscription, we will always have a high level, and for non-premium subscription, if it is a weekday, will be an SLA of medium, and if it is a weekend, then definitely a low if you don't have a premium subscription. Now, this model works really well, and we are using some extended function of the spec. But how do we test this? If here we will bend a little bit on the capabilities of the specification and what we can or cannot do, so we will move a little bit in the gray area, but stay with me. So what we are saying here with the DRG, there is a decision that has two information requirements. One is coming from the input data, and one is, if I do like this, it becomes even more clear. To determine the SLA, we need to know two pieces of information. If it is a premium subscription, and what is the values of today. What we can do is that we can actually, this one I want to show to you. What I can do is that if I write the test like this, which normally is what people would normally do, and if now I run the test, of course, because we are in a weekday, I'm not a premium, and therefore the SLA is medium. If I wanted to invoke the test during the weekend, so I want to have the determinism, now I override the value of the decision. So it means that I must know what I'm doing. But what you can achieve here is the engine is very flexible. If you decide to override a decision, you may, and therefore now your tests are finally determinist in fully deterministic approach. So you don't have to sort of like rely on changing the clock of the system. Of course, please don't do that. And this can scale even further if say that today's date is coming from a BKM that takes the value from configuration. You may play this in the most I would say, efficient way that is considering your deployment environment, whatever you want. My only suggestion here is that the most simple way to do this kind of operation is to test it with this approach, knowing that we are using some extended function of the spec, knowing that we are sort of like really moving on the edges of what is permitted or not, but it's still valid, because what I'm saying, or everything I'm saying, is that it is I'm basically overriding the value of this function. And one thing that maybe people don't know about is that if I do the scenario simulation for this model, and I take the DMN, which is the support SLA, normally, of course, the scenario simulation would give you the today's date as a decision, because this is what I see. But nothing forbids you for doing like this. So I've taken it out of the decision that you want to check, and I'm giving it as an input. And so basically here now, I can define exactly the same test that I did with Java, but with scenario simulation. So this is also available to business analyst practitioner. As the best cooking show, I have it prepared also as well on the side, so that we don't have to spend time here. But as you can see here, I have the scenario simulation with the input data and the decision overridden, and so I can make sure of the test. I think that I need to run a bit, so I won't show you the demo for the BPMN, but we will share maybe the code repo later. Here there is, when it comes to these functional approaches and mutability, it comes with also cross-cutting concerns, such as circuit breaker. Say that you want to evaluate the SLA that you've seen so far, to also notify a pager in the case that you are in a SLA of high. Here, I've seen people, and I've seen also a very good friend of mine who did the pager call directly in the right-hand side of the rule. Trust me, you don't want to be like my friends, and you want to really have the concern about invoking the system and so on, taking care at the proper thing. So my suggestion is, don't use the Java function to call the pager directly in a BKM of the DMN. Make a BPMN process, take the DMN here, you will have a gateway, and then you will have your script task, your service task with the work item handler to invoke the pager. This way, all the concern about, I shouldn't ring the pager twice in an hour, or whatever you want, you can do it in the most appropriate system, and you avoid a lot of headache, trust me. So finally, one last demo that this is running in more level of complexity. We've used as well Apache Camel, a very famous framework for integration with DMN. And the use case that we were presented is about running some message routing use cases. What we wanted to do is that the requirement was, it comes what is called HL7 fire messages. These are a format that are very widespread in healthcare use cases. So we received the call as a webhook component, as a REST API call, and we needed to implement some routing logic that said, okay, all the messages that are being fired from a specific application, we want to capture it in a specific queues. And especially all the messages that are about ADTs, meaning admission, discharge, and transfer of a patient. As well, other messages that are related still to the same application, but are only specifically about patient discharge, will be captured in another queue, and so forth and so on. So what are the technologies that we used there? Well, Fire is the format that we were given, and Apache Kafka were the technology that was requested to place it into the queue. We've used Apache Camel, that is very easy to make the integration, and we did the DMN as the routing logic directly embedded inside of the application. So based on what we've seen, nothing prevents you from defining this decision table, which was to be shared with the business stakeholder about what are the rules, or sort of like the business relevant rules that you want to apply in order to dispatch it to the relevant queues. So in this case, we have only 2 rows for just for simplicity's sake. But you can imagine that this table received many rows in order to dispatch it to the appropriate queues. And so we know that this is a decision table that says under certain criteria, we'll dispatch it to a specific queue. Under other criteria, I will dispatch it to other queues, and so on. And finally, this is basically all the code that you need with Apache Camel and the KeyDMN component, the KeyCamel component of Drools, in order to receive a message from a REST endpoint, from a webhook operation. Then you dispatch it to an embedded session of Drools that evaluates this decision model. So just reiterating on also what Alex was saying earlier, here I've chosen DMN simply because, yes, not true. I say not a big surprise. I like DMN, but you can define as well if you needed any other rules that you wanted to define with DRL or what have you. Then finally, from REST to DMN to decide what is the queue that is needed. And with Apache Camel, it's very easy to dispatch it to the appropriate queues. And so I've highlighted for you all the code that is really relevant. The rest, for those of you who may have played or using Apache Camel, knows that there comes with a certain ceremony a little bit, but these are sort of like standards. After a while, you don't see those lines any longer. So maybe in the interest of time, I will jump from the live demo of this simply because you cannot really see the Kafka queues, but trust me, the code is basically all the thing that you needed is basically presented here. So in the slide, there will be some links where you can see this in action. So let's come to a discussion about Kogito DMN and a specific feature when DMN is placed with the Drools on a Kogito platform, that is about the automatic generation of OpenAPI descriptor. OpenAPI is a standard, it's a very broad known standards about describing modern API, meaning that you define a contract that API is supposed to answer to. We support for you the out-of-the-box code generation of OpenAPI based on DMN item definition and the DMN evaluation. It means that if you define a data structure in DMN, it will automatically reflect in the OpenAPI descriptor. And similarly, once you place a DMN inside of a Kogito-based application, you would have the OpenAPI descriptor showing you really what are the operations that you perform on evaluation for it. So you can use this to interact with the system, but also as well, you can use it simply with what they are called the Swagger code generator. To basically, you take the API spec and it will stub automatically the code for you. Think when you've seen the presentation from Guilherme that he interacted with a Ruby on Rails application against a Kogito-based API with DMN. At the time, we didn't have this feature. But say that now today, you had the Swagger code gen for Ruby, you could generate on Ruby. You want to generate it with Go, generate it with Go, and so forth and so on. So you get the idea. So here I've tried to, during the presentation, to always increase the level of complexity of the demo. I've taken inspiration from a master thesis that I've seen was investigating the applicability of open standards such as BPMN and DMN for tackling the use case of describing the process out of a surgical theater, after a surgery. So what happens after a surgery, the patient will be monitored and the vitals will be evaluated. Some are directly evaluated by machines, but others are more evaluated accordingly to guidelines. So in this simplified example, and just to be clear, I'm not a doctor. This is not medical advice. Always seek professional medical advice, and this is only for information about how these capabilities can apply. What the thesis was investigating is that the integration of the process that you see there and some guidelines accordingly to the Italian entities that prescribe them, how they can be integrated in a system, the EHR system of the hospital, to really be a support system to the surgeon, to the anesthesiologist, So here, think about a CDS webhook that you can invoke with DMN, for instance, to give the support to the surgeon in not only in the vitals being recorded, but also in the evaluation of these guidelines where can be directly automated. So I'll just show you the demo here. Let me get to the DMN and start this. Sorry, let me close this. Yes, I close this Studio Code and then now open this one. So the guidelines has different parts, but to summarize, there is a key point, which is the evaluation of some vitals accordingly to a score which is called Aldriti, that for the Italian entities are applied in a very specific way, so with a few specificities. So in the master thesis, it is shown how you can go from the paper to something that is indeed the DMN models that you expect. So you see here there are some vitals that are being recorded and some decisions that are being taken based on that. So this might be kind of like sound trivial, but really think about it, because what we are starting to do here is that you don't have anymore just a paper. Here, this one is actionable. It can be used. And the OpenAPI descriptor in action, it allows us to do the following. So let me take a browser, or do I have it here? And now I go to the Swagger OpenAPI generated from that. So we have learned that there is this capability that allow us to go from a DMN model, this DMN model, automatically to an OpenAPI descriptor code generated. And of course, what I forgot here. Okay. Of course, sooner or later, the demo gods are not happy with you. Let me just try to close it.
Someone said they trust you more. They trust Matteo and DMN more than my doctor.
It's not medical advice. So let me just clean it, because of course, later some demos have to crash for whatever reason that I don't know. But let me try to do it again. Otherwise, I have another one.
Live. Yeah, that's real. That's for real.
There, Matteo, you don't have any REST clients implemented on the code, right? That's just the DMN file. That's the only file that is generating this endpoint.
Yeah, so let's say we don't encode anything. So all of these is automatically generated. And thanks to the demo god, they decided to have mercy of me. So what you have is that now the Swagger OpenAPI is automatically generated. So we have a few inputs that we need to take. And if you wanted with the Swagger, you could always go from the description to actually testing it directly. But we can do one step more. This is a code-generated OpenAPI descriptor. It means that I can do something like this. OpenAPI, this one. This interface, which is, I would say, more human-friendly, can be more easily digested from your stakeholder, who can be a surgeon, a doctor, a practitioner, the stakeholder of the hospital. Automatically, you go from the Swagger OpenAPI things to a form that you can play with and use. So let's say that here, I'm filling in some values that are relevant. And basically, you can interact with the system and see what will be the result of your DMN when you put directly interaction. Of course, all this testing is good to be sort of like done as a one shot, but normally you have it as a test scenario so that you can integrate it and make sure that they don't regress. But think about when you want to interact in a workshop with your stakeholder. Now I can go, and I lost my Visual Studio Code. What is it? You can go to the to the workshop and say, oh, okay, for instance, they tell you, well, yeah, for whatever reason, this output is correct, but we want it slightly modified to be that the patient Okay, here I'm doing just a trivial change. May exit your surgical unit. Thanks to the Quarkus hot reload, it means that if now I fire this, you see that I fired the same things, that now the result immediately
So
changed.
you just saved the file and then
Exactly.
it got reloaded. Okay.
And in this case, the interface didn't change because the vitals are the same. So, but we could really sort of like use these now more interactively with our stakeholder. We can engage them. So if I were a business analyst, I would come to the workshop with a system that is live, that is can be responsive. And we want. I'm always leaving the presentation, so. I don't, we are really running a little bit long here, but I prepare for you, there will be links so that you can check a similar example where I've taken another scientific publication. In this case, it is to estimate the cardiovascular disease risk. It's called the Framingham score. Again, this is not medical advice. I'm not a doctor, so we seek professional advice. But the thing that I was interested here is to see really the only action that I really did was to read the paper and to model it with DMN. Out of the box, I got a standard notation to formalize what is the model that the scientific publication described. I got an executable model as well with an open standard so that you can define this. This is the logic, this is the scenario simulation where I've run the same cases that the scientific publication said and obtain, as I was expecting, the same result. I have automatically co-generated an OpenAPI descriptor that can be integrated with a CDS webhook inside an EHR system on the cloud. You deploy it, you have Informatic Introspector, you can use it with the REST API call, and as we can see, we can automatically generate forms that we can interact with the system. So here is the food for thought that we'll leave to the audience today. Wouldn't it be nice if we can, for all the scientific publication, describe the model that they discovered with the scientific publication in an executable format with DMN, such that people, say the subject matter expert here is a doctor, she may not know programming, or the physiologist, he may not know about programming, but we have a better tool than programming as well to integrate inside of maybe a more complex environment which involves programming, to really formalize what they have in the paper as executable code with also visual notation. And as well, if we do so, wouldn't it be nice that we can automatically have this paper now could be looking at our data automatically without having us to have an expert know about the paper and see what inference would say on your specific data. And I don't have an answer for it, of course, but I'm happy to think that maybe DMN is a little piece of a puzzle to go into that direction.
It's fantastic, this question. Sorry to interrupt you, Matteo, but it would be useful, and this question align with the question that we have from Rafael, because to interact with the DMN would be helpful to have the form generated you just showed, and it seems that people are impressed by that. Is it already available today?
It's available on the SmallRye community. So there is a SmallRye distribution, because this form generation basically is nothing specific about Kogito. So we have this technology as well being explored inside of Kogito, of course. But let's say that you liked it as a concept, you can go to SmallRye simply because it only depends on OpenAPI.
That's awesome. Thank you, Matteo.
All right, so I'm taking really a lot of your time. Let me just go through the conclusion, and here I'll only reference so you can take your breath now. Meanwhile, maybe Alex and Karina, I'll ask if there are any remainder of the question that we'd like to discuss. So think again, when you are facing a DMN implementation, think that you are describing business relevant decisions, not really rules in a sort of like a mutability approach. And think about the power of the communication that you can achieve with the DMN model that describe a documentation and a common language with the analyst. So also combined with the availability of professional consulting, training books, all of these you can really scale. And is an open standard. We participate not only at the RTF as Red Hat that define the specification, but also we participate in the TCK, where we show with other participant that the DMN that it's specified at OMG, it's really executing the way that we expect. And with Kogito, you know that this can be executed in a cloud native environment based on OpenShift. In the documentation, you find a lot of material. Also, we take care to provide a lot of example with the DMN built-in function. If you find interesting the DMN validation feature, there is the book of Bruce Silver. I think that also Alex has it. He was showing it to me before the thing. And also we have one video that we did with Bruce Silver. We presented Decision Camp some experimental things about doing some automated tests for decision table. Is experimental, but if you fancy these things, please check it out. If you find interest, the DMN Patterns, there is the book, that book from Bruce Silver and Edson. If you really are nerd about it, there was a nice article that Eduardo and Luca helped me to have it polished about implementing the Y Combinator on DMN and Phil. I'll just say to you that it's a very sort of like a really to the boundary thing. So please check it out if you're interested. And I should also say, I'm not sponsored to talk about any of this, but I would like to give you these references so you know where do we go from here. So besides joining us on the mailing list, I give you some references that you can check it out. Where DMN is used out in the wild. Now the standard is being available from a few years. So the Mortgage Industry Association organization, has been recommending it. There is also a community at BPML. I finished the voice for today. At BPMN Plus Health at OMG is trying to promote the use of DMN, BPMN, and other open standards in the field of healthcare. If you find of interest the decision management things, please check it out. The DMN community. It's a very interesting community with many interesting articles. I strongly advise you to engage in there and to participate if you have a use case as well. And of course, the TCK. And finally, just a few videos and resources. This was a deep dive. If you don't know what DMN is, then this will have been very hard for you. But I know that Guillermo have also sponsored the Learn DMN in 15 Minutes website. So start there. If you need an introduction, you can get back to the recording of this video after I've done this that little website. And maybe here you also see some other path forward to go for an AI and integrating machine learning with DMN, with Trust AI. And thank you for the time. Sorry.
Wait.
Go for it.
We have one more small question.
Go for it.
Our community and what's new in DMN standard 1.3 versus 1.4.
Ooh.
Okay. So hi Ravi. So DMN 1. Okay. Now the changelog, I always find it difficult to remember, but one of the biggest addition of DMN 1.3, beside a few bug fixing, we had the temporal operators are, I would say, the most interesting feature for you that you can use in DMN 1.3, which were not available before. There is an interesting article from one of our colleagues on DZone, I think, that was showing that in action. Sorry, I forgot what's the name of the article, but I invite you to check it out. DMN 1.4 is currently being discussed at the RTF. So still some time to go. We don't know, but for sure I can tell you that what I can tell you is that I've been keeping track of some use cases, and we propose to the RTF, because we don't do it alone, some features that may answer some specific use cases. So if you think that something is missing at DMN in general, of course, go to OMG website. You can file a Jira there where you can describe what is your need. So the the answer that it's truthful is that you should raise it directly there. But don't hesitate also to come to us also later on the mailing list to discuss your use cases, and so that we can propose to the RTF in more details with you.
About 1.4, when is it coming out? Any idea?
Normally now difficult to say, because there is not really a date fixed just yet. But the underlying approach that the RTF has is a time-boxed release. So we can expect 1.4, 1.5, whatever it will be, on a regular cadence. Of course, doing a specification is not as easy as doing software. Not the software is trivial, but it takes more time. So it's not like every 3 weeks we will have a release of DMN. It will be sort of like I would expect it sort of like on a few years basis. You will have an update, and also it's retro-compatible. So that is important to say. So say we are discussing now 1.4, so it means that there will not be any sort of like big changes. But we will have some features that I know for certain will help on some use cases that I've seen in the wild. So always remember that, because both at the TCK and the RTF are listening, and of course you have us that we can be a proxy for you as well to try to argument more on that.
That is lovely, really. And Alex, any other question?
No, I don't have any other question. I think we overwhelmed Matteo with questions today.
Matteo, thank you a lot for this deep dive that we had in DMN today. It was awesome.
No, thank you for having me today. I hope this has shown a few spotlights to different features. And please, again, don't hesitate to interact with us offline. Also, this talk. If you have any question or certain curiosity, we will try really to engage with you.
Perfect. Thank you, Matteo. Have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you. Ciao.
And before we go, ciao. Before we go, I want to highlight that if you, part of our community, the Key community, are interested to share your experience and to share something that you learn about the Key business automation space, the projects from Key, we have this link for KieLive call for papers. So submit to us and we'll evaluate and contact you.
Yes, exactly. Actually, anyone is welcome to presenting on the KieLives, and we are opening the space. So if you are interested on presenting, just let us know, send us a title. That's all we need at the start, and then we will get in touch with you, okay? So the deck that Matteo used to present today, the slide deck, is also available on our speaker deck profile. You can find it all there, along with the past KieLives decks too. So that was what we had for today. And thank you a lot for being here with us. See you on the next KieLive.
Thank you very much. See you.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.